everyone, and welcome to the Read Aloud and Text-to-Speech Supports and Accommodations video of the Supports and Accommodations video series. Going to be sharing information today about, obviously, Read Aloud and Text-to-Speech, specifically for our M-STEP and My Access assessments. I'm Jen Paul. I'm the English Learner and Accessibility Assessment Specialist. Firstly, we will start out with just a brief review of our Supports and Accommodations framework, which will help you kind of understand how to select appropriate supports and accommodations. And then, of course, we'll jump into the meat of the video for the day, which is giving you information about those read aloud and text-to-speech options for students. So the big ideas for our supports and accommodations framework are you need to be making team-based decisions, even for English learners when it comes to which supports and accommodations are going to be appropriate, not just for their instructional purposes, but when it comes time for the assessment. Make individual student decisions. We can't stress this enough. Every time you think about offering a support or an accommodation to a student for a state assessment, you really need to be doing that at the individual student level. Don't make blanket decisions. And then make sure that you're really providing supports that the student needs and actually uses on a regular basis during the regular instruction. There are 3 levels to our supports and accommodations offered on our M-STEP and My Access assessments. You have what are called universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. Universal tools are things that are going to be available to all students, and the use is primarily student-driven. An example of this would be a highlighter. The next level are what we call designated supports. These are things that are available to students who have a specific need, and the use is primarily educator-driven. So an educator, or even sometimes a team of educators, are sitting down to decide, is this support actually necessary for the student? Is this support actually going to be valuable for the student and meets a need that the student has to be supportive of them in their assessment endeavors? And then the last tier is what we call accommodations with a capital A. These are things that are only available to students with disabilities who have that specific need for that accommodation outlined in their 504 plan or IEP. However, for today's purposes, when we think about text-to-speech and read-aloud options, the students that we're really thinking about are students that might be struggling readers, students who may have attention disorders, and even students with visual impairments. Of course, there's lots of other students that may benefit, but these are some of our primary users of these support types. Let's start with M-STEP. There are 2 types of text-to-speech and read-aloud options. One of these is what we're calling the designated support option, and the other is what we call an accommodation. Let's start with M-STEP ELA because this is the most complicated one for folks to actually understand. If students are taking the online M-STEP ELA assessment in grades 3 through 7, they can have access to text-to-speech. This is what it's called. This is what you'll see in the online testing system itself. You'll see it called TTS or text-to-speech. This will read aloud questions and answer options to the students. You can group administer to the students. As long as they're wearing headphones, there's no problem with having multiple students in the same grade level testing online at the same time. Students that are using the read aloud option, this is where you have a test administrator or a reader, an in-person reader who is going to be there on site with the student, reading aloud the questions and the answer options to students. This does require a one-on-one administration for online testers, and the test administrator must use what we call the Read-Aloud Guidelines, which are found in the Supports and Accommodations Guidance document. It requires a one-on-one administration because the assessment is an adaptive assessment. Each student is receiving a different set of test questions from a student who may be sitting next to them. So reading aloud to a whole class of students would be distracting to all of those other students who don't need that support and are not seeing the same content that that one particular student may be seeing. So that's why read aloud for the online test needs to be a one-on-one administration. Now here's the accommodation version of this, accommodation with a capital A. This is only available for students in grades 6 through 7. It's not available in grades 3 through 5. So in grades 6 through 7, as an accommodation, students can have what's called text-to-speech passage. This is going to read aloud the test questions, the answer options, and the text for the reading passage to the students. Again, this can be group administered with students using headphones if they're taking the online test. Read aloud passage is going to work very similarly. The reader, in this particular case, can read aloud the questions, the answer options, and the text for the reading passages themselves. And again, same thing applies as to what I just talked about in the previous screen. Whoever the reader is must use those read aloud guidelines, which are found in the Supports and Accommodations guidance document. Now, when we think about students that might need the paper pencil version of the assessment, again, we've got a designated support option and an accommodation option. Works exactly the same way in principle as to what I just discussed. For students in grades 3 through 7 taking the paper pencil form of the assessment, they can use what we're calling the read aloud, which again is where you've got an on-site, in-person test administrator. Whoever's going to take on that role is going to be reading aloud those questions and answer options for a student. You can group administer this one for paper pencil testers in a small group in the same grade level. The test administrator must use those read aloud guidelines. So why can you administer this in a small group setting? Because every student in that grade level is going to be seeing the same questions, therefore they're going to be hearing the same thing. So you could group administer in that particular scenario. Now, when we turn to the accommodation form of this for your students taking the paper pencil test, if a student needs a reading passage read aloud to them, it's an accommodation and it's only available in grades 6 through 7, and you can read aloud those questions, answer options, and of course the reading passages as well. M-Step Math is pretty straightforward. The ELA was the hard one to understand kind of what's available for what mode, in which setting, but M-Step Math, pretty straightforward. So we have the designated support version of this. The online option is for students to use the text-to-speech version, which reads aloud questions, answer options to students. There are no reading passages for M-Step Math, so we're not going to see that here at all. You can group administer this. If a student needs an in-person human reader with them, again, they can read aloud the questions and answer options. If the student is going to be taking the paper pencil form of the M-Step Math test, and they're taking the English version, so we're just talking English, okay? Because there is a Spanish version, but we're just talking the English version. That test administrator, whoever's going to be doing the reading, can read aloud questions and answer options to students. And again, anytime a test administrator is going to be reading any of the test content aloud to a student for M-Step, they need to be using those read aloud guidelines for ELA and math that you could find in the Supports and Accommodations guidance document. Science and social studies. Again, very similar options, which is good. That means it's consistent. That means kids are going to be seeing very similar things and having similar experiences across the content areas if they have to take all of these depending on their grade level. For M-Step Science and Social Studies, there's just the designated support option There's no reading passages, so there's no accommodation form of this. Students taking the online form of the assessment have access to text-to-speech. It's going to read aloud questions and answer options. Now, if they're going to take the paper pencil form of this, again, reader can read aloud questions and answer options. Now, for science and social studies, currently we do have the option for educators to order a order that paper pencil form of the assessment along with an English DVD that will play audio in English for the student and also help students follow along with where they should be looking in their test booklets. So who can actually use the text-to-speech and read-aloud designated support or accommodations? Which students should benefit from using this type of support? There's some really great guidance that I have in our supports and accommodations guidance document. So if you go out and grab that document from any one of our web pages, you can go out to www.michigan.gov/mstep. And under the student support section of the page, you'll find that supports and accommodations guidance document that's going to provide you with a really handy worksheet of sorts to help you at the individual student level ask some questions about things that the student is currently using. So, does the student have an IEP or 504 section? Does the student have a visual impairment and perhaps the student may be learning to read Braille? Does the student currently use text-to-speech? Anyway, there's a number of questions on here that will help you make a decision about whether or not text-to-speech or even read aloud may be a good option for the student. Now, there's no threshold of check marks that you have to make on that sheet that I just showed you. What you are looking for, though, is a preponderance of evidence. Big fancy phrase for, is there enough here to make you think that the student is going to benefit from having this support type? You can't just have a few check marks, but there should be some volume there. What does text-to-speech look like in the system? This is a simple screenshot of what it looks like in the system. Students actually have some control over text-to-speech just a little bit in the online system. Students can control the volume within the system so that they don't have to exit and turn up volume on their desktop. They can do it right in the system. They can also control the speed to some extent. They can slow it down, speed it up. And then there's another option you'll notice called follow along that they can check or uncheck on that screen. The follow along highlights words as the text-to-speech is reading for students. Some students may find that beneficial, some students may not find that beneficial. And the student can actually turn off and turn that on whenever they'd like throughout their testing experience. Okay, My Access. My Access does have text-to-speech. For My Access, that follow-along feature that I just mentioned is actually defaulted to on for all students. If students, again, find that distracting, you can help them or they could go in and do it themselves. They can pull up that option box and disable that functionality as they're taking the My Access assessment. And in terms of how TTX functions, it mirrors the same procedures as if the items were being read aloud with adherence to the do not read aloud tables. All of this information that I've shared with you can be found in that supports and accommodations guidance document. If you ever need help determining if text-to-speech or read aloud or even any other support type might be beneficial or helpful for a student, or you've got other questions about what is available or how things work or function, or you're just confused in general about something else, about testing, please don't hesitate to check that document, of course, but then also send us an email, and I'm happy to even talk with you on the phone so that we can find a good solution and good fit for the student on the state test. Please send any questions you might have to mde-oeaa@michigan.gov. Thank you.